political decisions and communications of the courts, religious rituals, eulogies, and other central events of Roman political and religious life, and received a great amount of statues and monuments. Cicero highlights the role played by the gods, in special of Jupiter, as responsible for the salvation of the Res Publica, emphasizing their unity against conspirators, and declares the presence of the divinities in the city. More important, in this speech, Cicero opens an accessway to the apprehension of the gods, both by words and by images. Cicero attributes his success in unveiling the plans of the conspirators to Concilium Divinum. Thank you. It seems almost impossible that human reason had solved questions of such importance, but the gods are present, and you can almost see them. Cicero declares then that the gods run everything that happens in the herbs. Follows a reference to the portents and prodigies happened 2 years earlier in the consulate of Cota and Torquato. How do you say that in English, Torquato? Torquatus. And to Placatio Deorum, that only in that day was fulfilled, involving the asking of haruspices. Cicero's vocabulary is relevant, as the statues of the gods are expulsas, are driven out, the depulsa, while the statues of human beings of the past are knocked down, deictai. The distinction is important because if deiceo means putting something down, in the case the statues of human beings, for the statues of the gods, simulacra deorum, the verb used is depello, to drive away. Simulacra deorum depulsa sunt, verb generally used in reference to an animated being. If the haruspices infer in the destruction of divine and human statues as danger for the city and the Roman aristocracy, the destruction of the bronze tables of laws has also a clear sense, and together with the statue of Romulus, without any reference to Hemo in this speech, signalize the destruction of Rome and his imperium. The haruspices are gathered from all of Etruria, and if the gods were placated, they could change the destiny of their power. In the argument, if there is a destiny possible to be predicted, the gods that govern and save the city can change the future. After the actions recommended by the haruspices to placate the gods, of which only the 10 days of games are specified, the statue of Jupiter enters the scene. A new simulacrum Iovis was indicated. The field of vision of the statue, now turned east, is highlighted, illuminating the plans before secret of the conspirators and relating them to the provisions of the haruspices. The old statue looked to the west in the direction of Janiculo, protecting Rome from external enemies, and the new one looked to the Forum. This statue, central in the argument, is not the statue of the cult in the interior of the Cella, in the Capitoline Temple, but an external statue, bigger in position opposite to the one before, more prominent in the Capitoline area, and it could be easily seen from the Forum. The field of vision of the statue is equal to the field of vision of the god. Cicero, therefore, mentions the statue not only as a simple image, but as a visual manifestation of the god. Thus, the audience could see Jupiter with their own eyes. There is an animation of the divinity in its statue that sees, and this idea is discussed by Cicero in later texts. Cicero supports the traditional model of religious Roman action, as well as the model of divine behavior. Até porque, even because the success of a discourse depends of its immersion in its pressupostos. Predispositions, in the beliefs and in the knowledge of its audience. When the gods were discontent with the Romans, they sent signs before they took any measure, allowing some time for the Romans to try to solve the problem and reestablish good relations with its divinities through the Senate, the collective body responsible for the administration of divine matters. Rigorously speaking, this implies in a solid established belief in the interest of the gods for the city and in divine intervention in human affairs. In the third Catilinarian, you can interpret the figure of Jupiter Optimus Maximus as a rhetorical use of popular beliefs. If we observe, however, that in the first Catilinarian, as giving the speech to the senators in the temple of Jupiter Stator, the cult statue is also central in the argument, and in no moment the speaker use words like statua, signum, or simulacrum. We have to terms that include a reference to a manufactured object. The statue of cult is the god, Jupiter Stator himself, and there is no distinction between the divinity and its image. We must highlight that the audience of Cicero were then the senators. When that means they had shared knowledge or shared meanings between the audience of the Catilinarians. For the strength of the argument depends of a religious acquiescence of all involved in relation to the beliefs and knowledges of the divine images. On the third Catilinarian once more, Cicero puts a statue of a god in action. On the religious standpoint, there is only a small distinction between the divinity and its image. Modern historiography privileged the discussions the Greek and Latin intellectual discussions of God and its representation, differentiating the statue and the divinity, what is certainly much more adequate to the modern rationalism, and saw in the reference of divine images, only rhetorical mechanisms, assuming that Cicero's audience looked not to Jupiter, but to its statue. However, in third Catilinarian, Jupiter Optimus Maximus is a live god, that Jupiter that acts in front of his temple in Area Capitolina. Religious and perceptive experiences are culturally related and are inserted and depend on narratives. And the cultural context determines not only how the divinity is perceived and imagined by human beings, but also as the divine is pictured in contemporary figurative works. On this point, his recent historiography of Roman religion gave small destaque. Gave small importance to the statues, and this vision on a certain way is justified because Roman cult does not seem to be directed specifically nor depended on the gods' statues, but the images were present everywhere. They were central objects in the religious life of late Republic, and their role is far from insignificant in religious terms. Statues of the gods were visual mechanisms through which human beings had access to divine beings and communicated with them, and were integral part of the agenda of the political religions of the herbs. The Catilinarians are political discourses, responding to questions of political Roman life. And in them we don't find and couldn't find a reflection of the relations between the divinities and its images. In Catilinarian, the images are source and object of pietas, and divinity is confused with its statues, through which it materializes in the divine protection of Rome, and how the traces of the gods are fixed. Cicero was innovative in many aspects, dealing both with shared convictions of Roman society, shared with original insights, and in a dialogue with Roman contemporary authors and with the philosophical and theological Hellenistic debates. These authors wrote with a focused look in practice and religious practices and beliefs of their time and place, making discourses that are highly committed with their world. In the case of Jupiter Optimus Maximus in Third Catilinarian, we see a statue animated not only by the speaker, but also by the ritual context of the Placatio Deorum, in which Cicero supports his speech. The divinity certainly guarantees the legitimacy and authority of Cicero, but according to Claudia, the most important thing is that the statue is an offer of the human beings to divinity, and becomes the God itself, presents Deus, from religious actions, cultural actions, the homages and the discourse of the speaker, giving it action and identity. The statue is a human way of communicating with the gods, and is deeply fixed in human patterns of figuration and religious beliefs. Cicero's speech, as he gives an active role to the statue of Jupiter in Roman political life, show to the audience the perception, stimulating beliefs and expectations in relation to the divinity. Jupiter comes as a divinity that can see not only what happens in the city, but the minds and intentions of human beings, and is capable of acting directly in the physical world, sending strong signs, orientating the consul, and driving mad the bad citizens. And this verbal discourse is rooted in shared conceptions on divinities and their ways of action. For not all divinities have the superpowers of Jupiter, gods of augury and divination. And we're finished for today. Please come up.
Not quite. I mean, now
Yeah.
the fun begins.
Yes.
For us, anyway. You can get a well-deserved drink of water for now.
I can help.
Please.
Now, yes, shall we just proceed straight away to a discussion, and then we have drinks? Yes. Right. Well, whatever. So yes, let's open the floor to questions or comments. In either language, even questions in Portuguese, if necessary, can be, I suppose. So you're not quite done, actually. So
No, I'm
sorry,
not
yes.
quite done, no. Glad to stay.
Can be questions on individual papers, or indeed on overarching themes, but I think first and foremost we should start from Valentina's opening paper.
Alguém tem alguma pergunta sobre o primeiro trabalho da professora Valentina?
Yeah.
Só eu queria saber por que os óculos e não os auspícios, já que os
Thank you. No, I think it's an excellent question. You're right, and the aruspicas are mentioned, of course, very briefly, both in when he lists the laws, and equally briefly when he comments on the laws. But I think the real difference there is that what the augurs have is the connection with the auspicia. And, you know, as also Federico did say at the very beginning, the auspicia played a huge role from the foundation, or at least from the myth of foundation, which, you know, as Wiseman kind of discussed and was kind of elaborated later on. So that, I think, is the real main difference, and therefore the augurs become essential in the wider construction of the Commonwealth, as opposed to, as a wider, in the wider history, where beside that, you know, you certainly have the issue that Caesar had just been made member of the college, and therefore one might say, you know, he himself says, I'm going to say that the augurs are the most important priests, but certainly not because I'm part of, yes. And, you know, in a way, excusatio non petita, so he tells you straight away, you know, no one asked him to excuse himself. But I really think that therefore there is much more in there, and what I really think he's trying to do in the De Legibus, that is striking because of the difference with the Republica, is to counteract what was happening at an intellectual and political level with Claudius. Claudius was presenting an idea of the state where the augures had to be bound by law to behave in a certain way, and which, by the way, seemed to have been the normal way, but was written in law, and that was going to make the real difference. And therefore, Claudius was presenting a conception of the state that should work under the rule of law. And to that, in the De Legibus in Book 2, what Cicero is saying, well, wait a minute, actually no, the augurs are, their pronouncements have the force of law, and much more importantly, if you don't obey them, you're put to death. So giving them, therefore, almost a position above the law to a certain extent.
It's hard to keep this away from this personal association.
Yeah.
In the augurs. Yes, Carlos, because it's also part of the myths and legends of the beginning. I can't remember specifically Livy. Livy and the liver.
yes, no. I can certainly see that.
Livy and the liver.
Very much like his use of the Jupiter statue.
Write that down.
In terms of trying to assess his legitimacy and say, well, I am the one who can say this.
Yeah.
I am the one who can say this because Jupiter's.
Yeah.
Look what Jupiter's doing because I'm here.
Yes.
So it's kind of it's a bit hard to separate things, but of course
I can see. Yeah, I can see also what you mean. There is kind of also a difference between something that, or a power that is legitimated by the gods, and an action that you know that in future the gods are going to approve of. So I think that's also in intellectual terms that there is a distinction there, and therefore the augurs become more important. But no doubt the biographical element is there. Not the least, he says so. He says, I'm not saying that because of...
This is what these stories do too.
Yes. Thank you.
This is Shuma.
I wanted to ask about dreams.
The dreams.
Everybody's interested in dreams, so Jonathan, if you want to talk about dreams too. And the question is basically directed at Federico, which kind of this is what we were talking about when we came in, about that dream of David and Afioni, where he, his brother brings up the question of that dream where he's going to be restored in glory. And I think that really fascinating in your paper was when you were talking about concilium as both a singular and a plural on the Areopagus thing. And it just, I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about dreams in the context of concilium as a plural, as a place of, as it were, synosia, or intercourse between the gods and men. You were kind enough to mention Plato in the Swans passage, but of course there's a prophetic dream in the Phaedo as well about the third day is going to return to Philadelphia. And it seems to me that there are really important dreams in Cicero too, so I just want to mention three of them and just see what you think of them. Two of them in Divinati, only the one with the Atenite dream where he's going back and he's going to be restored. But then I think more important is the reference to the Republic, because there's that passage in the Republic that Quintus brings up, and then Marcus discusses about how you can have prophetic dreams if your soul is in good order. It can reach out to things unknown to it, both in past, present, and future. But above all, the Somnium Scipionis, which I take to be the most important passage in Cicero, and that if you, so getting back to this concilium idea, he's having this dream and his grandfather is predicting the future for him and telling him what's going to happen. And I guess I just wonder then about your thoughts on that. All three of you, if you have time, but just that since we can't really relate to Haruspicus and Aurus very much as modern people, but views about dreams, it seems to me, are very accessible as a place of intercourse between gods and men. And it seems pretty clear to me anyway, and this is what I'm asking you guys, is whether Cicero, it seems clear to me that Cicero thinks that dreams can come from gods. What do you guys think? Above all, Federico, I'm interested in yours because you touched on David and Natione, but I'd be interested in all of yours.
Thanks very much. Major question, major problem that of course would require, I suppose, a freestanding treatment. Well, my provisional assessment of a dossier that I quite readily admit I ought to look harder into is that dreams have a tremendously strong narrative, more broadly literary potential, that within the framework of a philosophical dialogue, for example, like the Repubblica, can be exploited quite brilliantly, as indeed he does. As far as the political dimension of prediction, whether in divinatory or non-divinatory contexts, is concerned, there are actually much more treacherous material, much more problematic material, at least in a Roman context, where, as Cicero duly points out in De Divinatione, the Roman government hardly ever resorts to evidence, whether real or completely made up, coming from dreams. There are only very few instances in which the Senate, for example, accepted in the Republic to listen to reports of a dream and then take action on the basis of that. There is the notable example of Metella at a crucial time, of course, in the middle of the social war in 90 BC. But that's in many ways an exception that proves some rules. Metella, of course, is a member of a very distinguished family in her own right. So when it comes to constructing, sort of carving out a place for divination in public religion, or indeed when it comes to defining its boundaries for the purpose of religio, indeed, or indeed when it comes to constructing political foresight in the Res Publica, dreams actually are hardly helpful at all as far as Cicero is concerned. Now, here again, though, we go back to the problem of what I would call Ciceronian exceptionalism. If, for example, the 22 books of Sulla's autobiography had survived, in full, or certainly to some extent, we would no doubt be getting a very different take on the political significance of dreams, because we know from a few fragments that do survive that dreams played a really key role in the account that Salah put forward of his own life, and indeed of the background of some key choices he made, crucial points in his life. Now, the extent to which he justified that from an intellectual or philosophical point of view is a different matter. Whether he did it at all or not is a different matter. But I'm pretty sure that we will be having a very different perception of the place of dreams in late Republican intellectual history, if, for example, Salah's autobiography had survived. Yes, I think I better leave it I better leave it here. But it is certainly a dossier that requires careful exploration. Not so much, I think, in connection with the exploration of the construction of political foresight, whether in divinatory or non-divinatory remits, which is what I've been trying to do in this context.
Podemos conversar tomando último cafezinho? Pode ser? Não preciso me levantar se vocês...
Of course,
Eu
yes.
tenho uma crise do ciático aqui, preciso levantar. Não é só ficar em pé, só por isso.
Valentina, do you want to say anything on this point?
No.
Okay.
You want me to translate that? Muito bem. Vou fazer uma tradução resumida do que foi discutido aqui em inglês. A pergunta que foi feita é qual o papel dos sonhos nessa área de divinação, se era considerado um lugar de comunicação entre os deuses e os homens. E a resposta que o professor Sant'Angelo deu é o seguinte, que é uma área que é muito complexa, que mereceria um tratamento separado, né? Mas que, em termos da religião pública, não, os sonhos não eram muito levados, quase nunca foram levados em consideração pelo Senado, que, em termos de argumentação política, os sonhos não tinham um papel. Que existem obras que não foram preservadas que falam sobre isso, e que talvez a coisa fosse diferente se essas obras tivessem sido preservadas e nós tivéssemos acesso a elas. Mas que hoje, não, no contexto do trabalho dele de pesquisa, o sonho não tem parte na área de divinação, não. Mais alguma pergunta? Ou vamos ao café? Vamos ao café, então. Uma boa tarde para todos.